When Big Shaq stops to help a shivering little girl on dark highway, he uncovers a chilling truth. She wasn't lost. She was taken. And the people who want her back? They'll do anything to erase her. But Shaq isn't backing down. Not this time. Because some battles choose you. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet stretch of highway. Shaquille O'Neal, known to the world as Big Shaq, guided his SUV smoothly down the open road, his mind still lingering on the charity event he had just left. It had been a good day. Smiles, laughter, and a sense of purpose filled the air as he had handed out scholarships and spent time with underprivileged kids. Moments like these reminded him why he did what he did. But as he glanced out toward the road ahead, his chest suddenly tightened. A small figure stood near the guardrail on the side of the highway, barely visible in the dimming light. A child. Alone. The wind whipped through her tattered dress, her thin arms wrapped around herself as she shivered uncontrollably. Her bare feet pressed against the cold asphalt, her knees bruised and dirty. Shaq's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Something was wrong. He slowed down, easing his car onto the shoulder a few feet away. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears as he turned off the engine. Why was she out here alone? Where were her parents? Stepping out of the car, his massive frame cast a long shadow as he carefully approached. He knew better than to move too fast. The girl, barely 8 or 9, was trembling, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear. "Hey there, kiddo," he said, keeping his voice calm, warm. "You okay?" The girl flinched, stepping back toward the guardrail. Shaq slowed his steps. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her wide eyes darting left and right, as if searching for an escape. Her dark, tangled hair was plastered against her forehead. She was breathing fast, her chest rising and falling in sharp gasps. Shaq raised his hands in a gentle gesture. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The girl didn't speak. Her lips were cracked, her tiny fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Shaq felt his stomach knot. She wasn't just lost, she was terrified. Carefully, he unzipped his jacket, slipping it off his broad shoulders. He knelt, making himself less intimidating, and extended the coat toward her. "Here, take this. You must be freezing." For a moment she hesitated, her little fingers twitching. Then, with cautious, shaky hands, she took the jacket and wrapped herself in it. It nearly swallowed her small frame, but the moment she felt its warmth, a soft whimper escaped her lips. Shaq exhaled slowly, relieved she was accepting his help. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "Annabelle." Shaq nodded. "That's a pretty name, Annabelle. Where are your parents?" At the mention of parents, her eyes filled with tears. She shook her head rapidly, gripping the sleeves of the jacket. They're not my parents," she choked out, her voice barely above a whisper. Shaq felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What do you mean?" His voice remained steady, though his mind was already racing. Annabelle looked around frantically, her breathing uneven. "They took me. She stopped abruptly, her gaze darting toward the darkening road behind Shaq. A single car sped past, headlights flashing briefly across her pale face. She recoiled, shrinking into the oversized jacket like she expected something terrible to happen. Shaq followed her gaze but saw nothing unusual. Just an empty road, stretching into the distance. Still, the fear in her eyes wasn't something a child should ever have. "Annabelle," he said softly, "do you know where you are?" She shook her head. I ran as fast as I could." Shaq swallowed hard. This isn't just a lost kid. This is something much, much worse. His instincts screamed at him to call for help, but he didn't want to scare her further. He needed to keep her calm. "You hungry?" he asked, reaching into his car and grabbing a protein bar from the console. He unwrapped it, breaking off a piece, and offered it to her. Annabelle hesitated for only a moment before snatching it up. She ate quickly, stuffing small bites into her mouth like she hadn't had food in days. Shaq felt his chest tighten. "When was the last time you ate?" She didn't answer. That told him enough. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As the ringing began, Annabelle's entire body tensed. "No!" she suddenly cried out, grabbing his arm with surprising strength for such a small girl. "Please, they'll find me." Shaq's pulse pounded in his ears. "Who?" Her voice cracked. "Them. They—" A sudden sound cut through the air. A distant rumbling engine. Shaq's eyes snapped to the road. A black SUV, its headlights off, coasting slowly toward them. Annabelle's breath hitched. "It's them." Shaq's gut twisted. He didn't know who they were, but everything in his body told him this was bad. The SUV rolled closer, its windows tinted so dark that he couldn't see inside. It slowed as it approached, crawling past like a predator stalking its prey. Annabelle gripped Shaq's arm tighter, shrinking behind him. Shaq straightened his massive frame, making sure the driver could see exactly who they were dealing with. The SUV hesitated. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the vehicle sped off into the night. Shaq didn't move. His jaw clenched. Annabelle trembled, whispering in a voice so small he barely heard her. "They know I'm here." Shaq exhaled sharply, gripping his phone. 911 needed to answer. Now the line finally connected. 911, what's your emergency? Shaq kept his voice even. "This is Shaquille O'Neal. I'm on Highway 17, just past mile marker 206. I found a little girl. Her name's Annabelle. She's alone, scared, and she says she was taken." Silence. Then the dispatcher's voice turned sharper. "Did you say taken?" "Yes," Shaq confirmed, glancing down at Annabelle, whose eyes were filled with pleading desperation. "And whoever took her just drove by us." The dispatcher's voice became urgent. "Stay where you are. Officers are en route. Do not let her out of your sight." Shaq wasn't planning on it. Annabelle gripped his sleeve. "They won't stop looking," she whispered. "They don't let kids go." Shaq tightened his jaw. "Not tonight, Annabelle. Not while I'm here." She swallowed hard, nodding slowly. Shaq turned his gaze back to the road where the SUV had disappeared. This wasn't over. Not even close. Shaq kept his large frame protectively in front of Annabelle, his eyes still fixed on the dark stretch of highway where the black SUV had disappeared. His pulse was steady, but his gut told him this wasn't over. The moment that car had crept past them, he had felt something shift, a cold sinking feeling deep in his bones. The dispatcher's voice crackled through his phone. "Sir, officers are on their way. ETA is approximately 10 minutes. Are you and the child safe?" Shaq glanced down at Annabelle. She was gripping the sleeves of his oversized jacket like it was her lifeline, her small fingers twisting the fabric. The wind blew through her tangled hair, and despite the warmth of his coat, she was still shivering. But it wasn't just from the cold. "Yeah," Shaq said slowly, his voice firm but calm. "We're safe for now." But Annabelle flinched at the word, safe. Shaq crouched down to her level again. "Hey, kiddo, the police are coming. They're gonna help, all right?" Her head snapped up. "No," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. "You can't let them take me." Shaq felt something cold crawl up his spine. "Why not?" His voice was gentle, but his mind was already racing. Annabelle clutched the front of his jacket, her little hands trembling. "Because last time, they did." Shaq's breath hitched. The way she said it, not in a childish, confused way, but with the heavy weight of someone who had learned a terrible truth too young, it set off every alarm in his head. "What do you mean last time?" he asked carefully. Annabelle swallowed hard, her lips pressing together. She looked over her shoulder at the darkening highway, like she expected something to emerge from the shadows. "I told before," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "To a teacher. I told her I wasn't supposed to be there." Shaq waited, his hands resting lightly on his knees, letting her take her time. Annabelle's eyes darted up to his. "They called someone. A policeman, but he took me back." Shaq felt his stomach drop. He leaned in slightly. "Back to who, Annabelle?" She hesitated, then whispered, "To them." Shaq's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a lost child. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a system failure. Annabelle's small body trembled violently, and she suddenly clutched at something inside the oversized jacket. Shaq watched as she pulled out a torn, dirty stuffed bear. It was small, the fabric worn down from years of being held too tight. The right ear was barely hanging on by a few threads. "You've had that bear a long time, huh?" Shaq said gently. She nodded, running a tiny finger over the bear's frayed stitching. "What's his name?" he asked. Annabelle hesitated, then whispered, "Charlie." Shaq smiled softly. "Charlie looks like a good bear." Her lip quivered. "He's all I have." Shaq felt something heavy press against his chest. "You got me now," he said without thinking. And to his surprise, Annabelle blinked up at him, as if the words had caught her off guard, like nobody had ever told her that before. But the moment was short-lived. Headlights flickered in the distance. Annabelle gasped, gripping Charlie tighter. Shaq turned sharply. It was just another car passing by. But the way Annabelle instantly recoiled, shaking, told him something was very, very wrong. Shaq didn't push. Instead, he gently reached into his pocket and pulled out a small granola bar. "Eat," he said simply, handing it to her. She hesitated before taking it, unwrapping it with trembling fingers. The moment she took a bite, she let out a small, broken sound. Relief mixed with hunger. Shaq sat beside her on the cold pavement. "Annabelle, can you tell me what happened? Who took you?" She chewed slowly, staring at the ground. "They weren't always bad," she finally said. Shaq waited. "The lady, she was nice at first. She said I could call her mama. She gave me a bed, and I had a room with a window. But I couldn't leave." Shaq felt his jaw tighten. "When I asked to go home, she got mad." Annabelle's voice wavered. "She said I was ungrateful." Shaq inhaled deeply, controlling the storm inside him. "Do you remember where your real home is?" Annabelle shook her head. "I remember a big red mailbox," she whispered, "and a dog named Bruno, and my brother. He's older." Shaq felt something burn behind his eyes. "What's your brother's name?" Annabelle hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think they made me forget." Shaq exhaled slowly. Made her forget? What the hell had they done to this child? She looked up at him suddenly. "If I go back, they'll hurt me again." Shaq didn't doubt it, and that's when he made his decision. With steady hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911 again. The dispatcher answered instantly. "Sir, officers are on their way." "Listen," Shaq cut in, his voice calm but firm. "I need you to pull records on missing kids. A little girl named Annabelle, around 8 years old. She said she was taken." A pause. Then, "Sir, just do it," Shaq said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The dispatcher hesitated. Then the sound of typing filled the line. Annabelle hugged Charlie tighter. Shaq waited. And then, the dispatcher sucked in a sharp breath. "Sir, we have a match." Shaq's fingers curled into a fist. "Annabelle Carter," the dispatcher continued, "reported missing 4 months ago, last seen in Lakewood, Oregon." Oregon. They were in Nevada. Shaq's entire body went cold. "Sir," the dispatcher's voice was urgent now. "This child was marked as reunited with parents in the system 3 weeks ago." Shaq's blood ran ice cold. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Number she wasn't. She's standing right here." Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Sir, if that's true, then someone forged those records." Annabelle's small voice suddenly broke through the silence. "They won't stop looking for me." Shaq looked down at her, at the fear in her wide, exhausted eyes, and he knew. This wasn't just a missing child case. This was something much, much bigger. He clenched his jaw. "Send the right people," he said into the phone. "No one else." The dispatcher hesitated. Then, with urgency, "Understood." Shaq hung up and exhaled slowly. Annabelle looked up at him. "Are they coming?" "Yeah," Shaq said softly. "But don't worry, kid. No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go." Annabelle stared at him, searching his face for something. Then, for the first time, she nodded, and Shaq knew, no matter what happened next, he wasn't letting her out of his sight. The sky had darkened, a deep navy stretching over the lonely highway. The crisp air carried a sharp bite now, but Shaq barely felt it. His fingers curled tightly around his phone as he paced near his SUV, keeping one protective eye on Annabelle. The dispatcher had just confirmed something that made his blood run cold. Annabelle Carter had been marked reunited with parents 3 weeks ago, but she was here, alone, terrified, and running from someone who still wanted her back. Shaq's grip tightened. Who had covered this up? "Sir," the dispatcher said, her voice urgent. "Officers are en route. ETA 5 minutes." Shaq hesitated. Normally that would have reassured him. But Annabelle had begged him not to let the police take her, and after hearing that her supposed reunion had been a lie, his gut told him she had every reason to be afraid. He turned, watching as Annabelle crouched near the guardrail, gripping her stuffed bear so tightly that her small knuckles had turned white. She wasn't shaking from the cold anymore. She was shaking because she knew what was coming. Shaq lowered his voice. "Are the officers local PD or state?" A pause. Then, "Local, sir." Shaq's stomach twisted. What if the same people who returned her before were the ones coming now? Annabelle suddenly tugged at his jacket, her eyes wide with panic. "Shaq," she whispered. "Someone's coming." He turned sharply, his gaze snapping toward the highway. And then he saw it. A black SUV, the same damn one. It wasn't speeding this time. It was crawling. The vehicle moved slowly, deliberately, hunting. Annabelle let out a shaky breath. Her whole body tensed, like she was ready to bolt, but there was nowhere to run. Shaq stepped in front of her instinctively, planting himself between her and the approaching SUV. His massive frame cast a shadow over her small, trembling form. His heart pounded in his chest as the SUV inched closer, rolling almost silently across the pavement. It felt like the world had gone still, the only sound being the distant hum of an engine and Annabelle's ragged breathing behind him. The SUV reached them and stopped. The driver didn't get out. The tinted window stayed up, but Shaq felt the stare from behind the glass. Someone inside was watching, calculating, testing him. Annabelle's tiny fingers gripped the back of his shirt. "Shaq," she whimpered. Shaq's jaw tightened. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. The SUV idled there, its engine purring low. Then, without warning, it accelerated. Shaq turned just in time to see the taillights disappear into the night, vanishing around the bend. Annabelle gasped for air like she had been holding her breath the entire time. "They know," she whispered. "They know you have me." Shaq exhaled, dragging a hand over his face. This wasn't just some random abduction. This was organized, planned, controlled. And someone out there was making sure Annabelle never got away. The wail of sirens suddenly pierced the night. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the dark highway as 2 police cruisers approached. Shaq took a step back, keeping Annabelle close behind him as the first car pulled up. The officers stepped out. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp blue eyes, immediately clocked Shaq and did a double-take. "Well, damn," he muttered. "Didn't expect to roll up on Shaquille O'Neal tonight." Shaq didn't smile. "Neither did I." The officer straightened. "Dispatch says you found a missing girl?" His gaze flickered to Annabelle, who had shrunk further behind Shaq. "That true, sweetheart?" Annabelle didn't move. Shaq folded his arms. "Yeah, it's true. But there's a problem. She's scared to go with you." The officer frowned. "Scared? Of us?" Shaq nodded. "She says the last time she told someone, the police brought her back to the people who took her." The officer's expression hardened. "That can't be right." "Check your system," Shaq interrupted. "She was reported missing 4 months ago, but someone marked her as reunited with parents 3 weeks ago. That's a lie." The second officer, a younger man with dark hair, exchanged a look with his partner before pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, run a record check on Annabelle Carter, 8 years old, reported missing in Lakewood, Oregon. Static. Then, confirmed. She was removed from the database 3 weeks ago. Listed as found safe." The younger cop's face paled. Shaq crossed his arms. "Tell me that doesn't sound messed up." The first officer exhaled. "Look, let's take her in and figure this out. We'll..." Annabelle let out a terrified sob. Shaq turned just in time to see her collapse against the guardrail, shaking violently. "No," she gasped. "Please don't make me go. They'll find me. They always find me." Shaq felt his chest tighten. She was breaking down. The younger officer hesitated. "She's in full panic mode, man. We can't just throw her in the back of a cruiser." The first cop sighed, rubbing his temple. "So what do we do? We can't leave her here." Shaq made a decision before he even realized he was speaking. "She stays with me." The officers both turned to him. Mr. O'Neal," the younger cop started carefully. "That's not exactly protocol." Shaq didn't budge. "You want protocol? Then how about we follow the part where we don't put a traumatized child back in the hands of whoever's covering this up?" The officers hesitated. Shaq exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. "Look, I get it. You guys have a job to do. But we all know something here isn't right. If she goes into the wrong hands again, she might not make it out this time. Let me take her somewhere safe. I'll bring her in when we know who to trust." The first officer studied him, his blue eyes searching Shaq's face. Then finally, he sighed. "You do realize this puts you right in the middle of something messy, right?" Shaq nodded. "I'm already in it." A long pause. Then, "All right," the officer finally said. "But keep your phone on. If anything changes, you call us first." Shaq gave a firm nod. "Deal." The officers exchanged one last uncertain glance before heading back to their cruisers. As the sirens faded into the distance, Shaq knelt beside Annabelle. She was still shaking, her stuffed bear crushed against her chest. "You did good, kid," he murmured. She looked up at him, her eyes rimmed red. "Are they gone?" "For now," Shaq said, "but we can't stay here." Annabelle swallowed hard. "Where do we go?" Shaq thought for a moment. Then with quiet determination he said, "Somewhere they'll never expect." And with that, he lifted Annabelle into the passenger seat, shut the door, and pulled back onto the highway. Whatever was happening here, he wasn't letting them win. The highway stretched into the dark, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the cold night. Shaq's SUV rumbled steadily down the road. Annabelle curled up in the passenger seat beside him, gripping her stuffed bear with both hands. She hadn't spoken much since they left the scene, her small face pale, her eyes flickering toward the side mirror every few minutes, like she was expecting something to lunge out of the darkness. Shaq had seen fear before. He'd seen it in opponents on the court, in kids from rough neighborhoods, even in people facing loss. But this was different. This was pure survival mode. "You holding up okay, kid?" he asked, keeping his voice light. Annabelle didn't answer. She was still watching the mirror. Shaq followed her gaze. The road behind them was mostly empty, just a few distant headlights miles back. Nothing unusual. But that didn't ease the knot in his stomach. Something still wasn't right. The feeling had started the moment they left the police. Maybe it was the way the officers hesitated when he insisted on taking Annabelle with him. Maybe it was the fact that they let him go too easily. Or maybe it was the SUV that had been trailing them for the last 10 minutes. Shaq hadn't said anything yet. He didn't want to spook Annabelle, but he had noticed it immediately. No headlights, keeping a distance, always just far enough back to stay out of reach. And now, as they curved onto a more deserted stretch of highway, the SUV was speeding up. Shaq's grip tightened on the wheel. "Annabelle," he said gently, "I need you to trust me, all right?" She tore her gaze from the mirror, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Why?" she whispered. Shaq glanced back. The SUV was closing in. "Because we're not alone." Annabelle went rigid. Shaq reached over and placed a large, steady hand over hers. "Hey," deep breath, "I got you." She swallowed hard, but nodded. The SUV sped up. It wasn't just following them anymore. It was closing the gap. Shaq's pulse remained steady, but his mind was already calculating. There was an exit ramp ahead, leading into a quieter part of town. If they stayed on the highway, they'd be too exposed. He needed to lose them. "Hold on," he said, smoothly turning the wheel and veering toward the exit ramp. Annabelle tensed. "Are we running?" Shaq's jaw tightened. "No," he said. We're making sure we're not being hunted. The SUV followed. Annabelle gasped. Shaq. I see him, he muttered. They sped down the ramp, the road narrowing into dimly lit streets lined with old industrial buildings. The SUV didn't hesitate. It turned after them, keeping close, refusing to let them go. Shaq scanned the area. Too open, too many places for them to corner us. Then, just ahead, an old gas station. Shaq made a split-second decision and pulled in fast, cutting the headlights. He coasted into a parking spot behind a large truck, out of view. His massive hands stayed firm on the wheel, eyes locked on the road as the SUV rolled past. It didn't stop, didn't hesitate. It just kept driving. Annabelle let out a shaky breath. Shaq waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Then he exhaled. We're good. Annabelle still hadn't moved. Her hands gripped her bear so tightly Shaq was afraid she'd tear it in half. They found me, she whispered. Please don't let them take me. Shaq turned to her fully, his expression serious. No one is taking you anywhere, Annabelle. Her lip trembled. But they always find me. Shaq held her gaze. Not this time. She stared at him, eyes glistening, searching for something. And then for the first time she nodded. Shaq took a slow breath and looked back toward the road. The SUV was gone, for now. But this wasn't over. Not even close. He pulled back onto the road, this time choosing the smaller streets, winding through quiet neighborhoods instead of taking the main highway. He needed to buy time. Then, just as they turned a corner, red and blue lights flashed in the distance. Annabelle tensed. Shaq's gut twisted. The cops. They had called it in. Someone knew where they were. 2 patrol cars blocked the intersection ahead, their lights strobing against the dark houses. An officer was already stepping out, hand resting near his holster. Shaq slowed the SUV to a stop. Annabelle started shaking again. No, she whispered. Shaq's voice remained calm. We don't have a choice, kid. We have to see what they want. She grabbed his sleeve. But what if it's them? Shaq didn't have an answer. The officer approached, flashlight in hand. He tapped the driver's side window. Shaq lowered it. Mr. O'Neal, the cop said, eyes unreadable. Step out of the vehicle. Shaq didn't move. What's the problem, officer? The cop's face remained stone cold. Step out, now. Annabelle made a tiny whimpering sound beside him. Shaq clenched his jaw. Something was off. He didn't step out. Instead, he leaned forward, his deep voice measured, but firm. Badge. Number. The cop hesitated. Shaq's heartbeat slowed. It was all he needed. This wasn't protocol. If this was a normal situation, the cop would have identified himself immediately. Instead, he hesitated. Shaq's grip on the wheel tightened. I asked you a question, officer. The cop finally rattled off a badge number, but it was too late. Shaq had already seen the tell. Annabelle's breath was coming in short gasps now. Shaq, she whispered, we have to go. Shaq had already made his decision. Without another word, he hit the gas. The SUV lurched forward. The cop barely had time to react before Shaq was swerving around the patrol cars, his massive hands steady on the wheel as he tore down the street. Hold on, he told Annabelle. She clutched Charlie to her chest, eyes squeezed shut. Behind them, the patrol cars spun around, tires screeching. The chase was on. Shaq's pulse stayed even. He had been in pressure situations before, but never like this. He wasn't running for points. He was running for a little girl's life. He took a sharp turn onto an unlit back road, his massive SUV handling the road with precision. The cops, or whoever they were, followed. Then, ahead, a train crossing. Shaq's eyes flicked up. The red lights started flashing. The barrier was lowering. Timing. It would be close. Shaq floored it. The SUV shot forward, tires gripping the road, as the flashing lights reflected off the windshield. The train's horn blared, a deep, echoing warning. Shaq pushed through. The second they cleared the tracks, the train roared past behind them. The cop cars skidded to a stop on the other side. Blocked. Shaq didn't stop driving. He didn't say a word. He just focused on putting as much distance between them and that scene as possible. Annabelle finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't leave me." Shaq glanced at her. "No," he said softly. "I didn't." She hugged Charlie tighter. For the first time that night, her shoulders relaxed. Shaq kept his eyes on the road. He had one mission now: find out who was behind this, and make damn sure they never found her again. The night air felt heavier than before, pressing down on Shaq's chest as he pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of an old diner. The neon sign flickered weakly above them, casting a red glow over the cracked pavement. Annabelle was curled up in the passenger seat, clutching his jacket so tightly that her small fingers had turned pale. She hadn't let go of Charlie, her stuffed bear, since the moment they escaped the bogus police. Shaq exhaled, rubbing his temple. He had been in pressure situations before: game-winning free throws, packed stadiums, hostile crowds. But this was different. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. There was one person he could trust right now, an old friend who owed him a favor. Someone who could tell him what the hell was really going on. Just as he was about to dial, bright headlights flooded the SUV. Shaq's muscles tensed. His fingers hovered over the screen as two police cruisers pulled into the lot, tires crunching over loose gravel. No sirens this time, no urgency. Just slow, deliberate movements. His jaw tightened. Annabelle froze. Shaq could hear her breathing quicken, feel the small tremble in her body even though she hadn't moved. He reached over, covering her small hand with his. "Stay calm, kid." The doors of the first cruiser opened. Two officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their expressions unreadable. The taller one, a blonde with sharp eyes, walked forward with calculated ease. The other, stockier with a buzz cut, lingered near the car, watching. Shaq rolled down the window just enough to speak. "Evening, officers." His voice was calm but firm. The blonde cop's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Evening, Mr. O'Neal. You mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Shaq didn't move. "What's the problem?" The cop's gaze flickered to Annabelle, then back to Shaq. "We got a report about a possible child abduction. A little girl matching her description. You understand we need to ask some questions." Annabelle squeezed her eyes shut. Shaq kept his expression neutral. "Sure, but I need to see your badge numbers first." A beat of silence. The blonde cop's jaw flexed. "That necessary?" Shaq's brows lifted slightly. "Yeah, it is." Another pause. Then the officer slowly pulled his badge from his belt, holding it up just enough for Shaq to see. His partner didn't move. Shaq glanced at the name. Officer Daniel Reeves. "All right, Officer Reeves," Shaq said, locking eyes with him. "Since we're asking questions, let's start with one. Who reported this so-called abduction?" Reeves didn't blink. "A concerned citizen." Shaq exhaled through his nose. "Liar." "There's been a misunderstanding," Shaq said, keeping his voice steady. "I found Annabelle on the side of the highway alone. She told me she was taken by people who weren't her real parents. I called it in myself. Dispatch confirmed she was listed as reunited a few weeks ago, but we both know that's not true, don't we?" Reeves's expression remained unreadable. "We're just here to make sure everything's in order." Shaq leaned slightly forward. "Then run her name." A flicker of something crossed Reeves's face. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Shaq said. "Run her name. Right here. Right now. I want confirmation from your system that this girl is where she's supposed to be." The stocky cop shifted uneasily. Reeves shot him a quick glance before turning back to Shaq. "That's not how this works," Reeves said coolly. Shaq nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Silence stretched between them. Annabelle refused to let go of Shaq's jacket. She wasn't crying, wasn't speaking, but Shaq could feel her terror like a living thing in the air. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A black, unmarked car, parked across the street, watching. Shaq's heartbeat slowed. They weren't alone. He turned back to Reeves, who was still staring at him, unmoving. Shaq made a choice. "I'm calling my lawyer," he said, reaching for his phone. Reeves finally moved, holding up a hand. That won't be necessary. Shaq's grip tightened. It is. Another beat of silence. Then, with clear reluctance, Reeves finally pulled out his radio. Dispatch. Run a check on a missing child. Name, Annabelle Carter. Age, 8. The radio crackled. A pause. Then, stand by. Shaq watched as Reeves shifted slightly, the first hint of tension creeping into his otherwise composed demeanor. A long minute passed. Then, static. Annabelle Carter. The dispatcher's voice finally returned. Listed as deceased. Annabelle gasped. Shaq went still. What? Reeves barked. There was a long, heavy silence. Then the dispatcher repeated, slower this time. Annabelle Carter was declared deceased, officially recorded 3 weeks ago. Shaq's stomach plummeted. Annabelle wasn't just erased, she was buried. The realization hit hard and fast. Whoever took her, they wanted her gone so badly that they filed a fake death record. Reeves turned his gaze back to Shaq. His face was unreadable, but his grip on his radio had tightened. Shaq kept his voice even. So what's the play here, officer? You still gonna tell me this is routine? Reeves didn't answer, but the unmarked black car? Its engine started. Shaq heard it before he saw it. A low, slow purr of a powerful vehicle coming to life. Across the street, the car's headlights flicked on, casting a harsh white glow through the windshield. Shaq couldn't make out the driver's face, but he didn't need to. They were watching, waiting. For what? For him to hand Annabelle over? For Reeves to make a call? For something worse? Shaq didn't plan on finding out. He turned back to the officers. If she's dead, he said slowly, then who the hell is sitting in my passenger seat? Reeves's expression darkened. His radio was still in his hand, but he didn't speak into it. He was calculating something, weighing options. Shaq clenched his jaw. Then, Annabelle moved. She pushed herself further into the seat, as if some instinct told her what Shaq already knew. This wasn't just an accident. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a cover-up. Shaq looked directly at Reeves. I don't know who you work for, he said, his voice like steel. But I know damn well it's not her. Reeves held his stare. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward his cruiser. His partner hesitated before following. Neither of them looked back. A minute later, both police cars pulled out of the lot. The unmarked black car lingered a little longer, its headlights still illuminating the SUV. Then slowly, it drove away. Shaq didn't breathe. Annabelle's small voice finally broke the silence. They're going to keep coming, aren't they? Shaq exhaled, gripping the wheel. Not if I find them first. And with that, he started the engine and disappeared into the night. The night stretched on, silent and heavy. The further Shaq drove, the more the weight of what had just happened settled deep in his chest. His hands gripped the steering wheel as his mind replayed the dispatcher's words. Annabelle Carter, listed as deceased. Not missing, not reunited. Dead. And yet, she sat right beside him, small and trembling, her fingers still locked around her stuffed bear. Shaq had spent years in the public eye, navigating fame, power, and privilege. He had seen corruption, greed, the ugly side of people. But this was something else entirely. A system that was supposed to protect children had buried Annabelle alive, and Shaq had just put himself right in the middle of it. But he wasn't backing down. He pulled into a secluded parking lot behind an old motel, checking the mirrors twice before turning off the engine. No headlights, no black SUVs. They had shaken their tail, for now. Annabelle finally looked up at him, her voice small. Where are we? Somewhere safe, Shaq murmured. Just for now. She hugged Charlie closer but didn't question him further. Shaq pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He needed someone who wasn't compromised. Someone who could confirm what he already knew in his gut. This wasn't just one missing girl. This was bigger. Way bigger. His thumb hovered over a name. Agent Travis Colton, FBI. They had met years ago at a charity fundraiser for missing children. Colton was one of the few people Shaq had met in law enforcement who actually cared, the type of guy who still lost sleep over cases that went cold. If there was anyone who could help, it was him. Shaq hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then, Shaq? The voice on the other end was groggy, confused. Man, it's 2 a.m. You okay? Shaq didn't waste time. Travis, I need your help, and I need you to listen carefully. The tone in Colton's voice immediately shifted. Talk to me. Shaq glanced at Annabelle, making sure she wasn't panicking again. Then he stepped out of the car, walking a few feet away before lowering his voice. I found a little girl on the highway. Said she was taken. When I called it in, they told me she was already reunited with her family. Shaq exhaled. Then when I pushed harder, they told me she was dead. Silence. Then, what? Shaq continued, voice tight. I saw the documents myself. They wiped her out of the system. If I hadn't found her, she would have just disappeared. And Travis? Shaq took a breath. There were cops in on it. More silence. Then Colton let out a low curse. Shaq, do you have any idea what you just stepped into? Shaq's grip on the phone tightened. Tell me. A sigh. Then in a quieter tone, Colton said, Give me a second. Shaq waited, his pulse steady. He could hear Colton moving, papers shuffling, a keyboard clicking rapidly. Then, Colton sucked in a sharp breath. Shaq, this girl, Annabelle Carter, she's been missing for 4 months. And get this, her case went federal 2 months ago. Shaq's stomach dropped. Why? Because, man, she's not the only one. A cold wave washed over Shaq. Colton's voice was grim. At least 12 kids have gone missing across 3 states in the past year, all under suspicious circumstances. But the kicker? Every single one of them was found safe, except no one's actually seen them since. Shaq ran a hand over his face. So they're not just kidnapping kids, they're erasing them. Colton hesitated. It's worse than that. Shaq braced himself. How much worse? Colton exhaled. The black SUV you described? We've been tracking a vehicle with that same exact description. Same model, same plates, linked to at least 4 of these cases. We've tried running the plates, but they always come back clean. Shaq's jaw clenched. Annabelle had recognized that SUV immediately. They had been watching, hunting, waiting to take her back. Shaq turned and glanced toward the SUV where Annabelle sat. She was staring at her bear, tracing the frayed edges of its ear, lost in her own thoughts. She was lucky to be alive. Shaq's voice dropped lower. Who's behind this, Travis? Colton hesitated. Then, in a tone Shaq had never heard from him before, he said, I don't know, but whoever they are, they have power. Real power. Shaq exhaled slowly. So what do I do? Colton sighed. You already know what I'm gonna say, man. You can't handle this alone. Get to the nearest FBI field office. Hand her over. We'll put her in protective custody. No, Shaq said immediately. Colton hesitated. Shaq, you didn't see her face, Travis. The way she broke down when the cops showed up. She doesn't trust anyone. And after what I just saw, I don't either. Silence. Then Colton sighed. Damn it, Shaq. You always gotta make things difficult, don't you? Shaq let out a humorless chuckle. You knew that when you gave me your number. Another sigh. Then, all right, if you're not bringing her in yet, at least keep moving. Don't stay in one place too long. Already on it. Shaq muttered. And Shaq? Yeah? You need to understand something. If they went this far to erase her, they won't stop now. The moment they figure out she's still alive, they'll come for her. Shaq's fingers curled into a fist. Then I'll be ready. Colton exhaled. I'll start pulling what I can on my end. But Shaq? His voice lowered. Be careful, man. This isn't just one girl. This is something bigger. And if you're standing in their way, they'll come for you too. Shaq's gaze flickered back to Annabelle. Let them try, he said. Then he hung up. The weight of the conversation settled over him as he walked back to the SUV. When he opened the door, Annabelle looked up at him, eyes still wary. Who were you talking to? She asked softly. A friend, Shaq said. Annabelle hesitated. A good one? Shaq nodded. One of the best. She swallowed, fidgeting with Charlie's ear. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, Did he say what they want? Shaq's chest tightened. She was just a kid. She shouldn't have to ask that question. But she did, because she already knew. Shaq inhaled deeply. Not yet, he admitted. But I promise you, kid, I'm gonna find out. Annabelle studied him for a long moment. Then finally, she nodded. Shaq started the car. They had work to do. The low hum of the engine filled the quiet space as Shaq drove down a back road, far from the main highway. Annabelle sat beside him, her small frame barely visible under the weight of his oversized jacket. Her fingers absently traced the worn edges of her stuffed bear, Charlie. But her eyes remained distant. She was exhausted. Physically, emotionally. In every way a child shouldn't have to be. Shaq had spent years being the biggest guy in any room. He was used to people looking to him for strength, protection, leadership. But this was different. This little girl had no one. And yet, despite everything, she was still holding on. Shaq turned onto a secluded road, leading to a safe house, a small private cabin owned by an old friend who owed him a favor. It wasn't an official FBI safe house, but that was exactly why he chose it. Until he figured out who was pulling the strings, he wasn't handing Annabelle over to anyone. As he parked, Annabelle shifted, looking around cautiously. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice small. "Just a quiet place to lay low," Shaq reassured her. "Somewhere no one knows we are." She hesitated, glancing out the window before finally nodding. Shaq stepped out first, scanning the area. The cabin sat at the edge of a wooded clearing, far enough from the road that it couldn't be seen. No lights, no movement. Safe, for now. He opened the passenger door, and Annabelle climbed out, gripping Charlie tight. She still hadn't let go of the bear. Not once. Inside, the cabin was simple but warm. A couch, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms. The walls smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. Shaq locked the door behind them and checked the windows, making sure the blinds were drawn. Annabelle stood near the couch, shifting on her feet. She looked small in the dim light, unsure. "You hungry?" Shaq asked. She hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. He grabbed a protein bar from his bag and tossed it to her. She caught it with both hands, staring at it for a second before slowly unwrapping it. Shaq watched as she took a cautious bite. The way she ate, small bites, slow chewing, told him everything. She had learned to ration food. His jaw tightened. Annabelle swallowed, then looked up at him. "Are you gonna leave?" Shaq frowned. "Why would I leave?" She hesitated. "They always leave." Shaq knelt in front of her, making sure she saw his face. "Not me," he said. "You're safe here. But I need you to help me understand what's going on. Can you do that?" Annabelle bit her lip, gripping Charlie. Then slowly she nodded. Shaq pulled out his phone and opened his notes. "Okay. First question. Is your name really Annabelle?" Annabelle took a shaky breath. "Yes." Shaq nodded. "And those people who had you, they told the police they were your parents?" She stiffened. "They told everyone. They said I was their daughter, that I just had trouble remembering things." Shaq felt his stomach turn. They brainwashed her. He kept his voice steady. "Do you remember where you lived before they took you?" She frowned, trying to concentrate. "There was a big red mailbox," she whispered. "And a dog. His name was Bruno." Shaq made a note. "Okay, what else?" She closed her eyes. "My mom. My real mom. She smelled like vanilla. She used to sing to me at night. And I had a brother." Shaq sat up. "You remember his name?" Annabelle hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "Eli." Shaq's pulse kicked up. This was real. She was real. Somewhere out there, a family was missing her, and the people who took her had tried to erase all of it. Annabelle fidgeted, staring down at Charlie. "They don't like when you remember things," she murmured. "If you ask too many questions, they make you forget." Shaq narrowed his eyes. "How?" She swallowed. "They don't let you sleep. They make you repeat things until you believe them. And if you still don't, they take you away." Shaq's breath slowed. "Take you where?" Annabelle's grip on Charlie tightened. "A basement. she whispered. Shaq's entire body tensed. There were more. She looked up at him, her small face filled with something fragile. Hope. Shaq. Can we save them? Shaq took a slow breath, his mind already working. He had money, influence, resources. He could do something. But first, he needed more information. Annabelle, he said carefully, do you remember where this basement was? She nodded slowly. Shaq grabbed his phone. Can you show me on a map? Annabelle hesitated. I think so. He pulled up Google Maps, handing her the phone. She stared at it for a long moment before slowly zooming in on an area near a highway, 3 states away. Shaq studied the location. It was remote, surrounded by thick trees and empty roads. There were no houses nearby, just an old abandoned factory. His stomach dropped. Annabelle, he said, his voice steady. How many kids were there? She gripped Charlie. I don't know, she whispered. A lot. Shaq felt something cold settle in his chest. Annabelle wasn't the only one. This was bigger than a single kidnapping. This was an operation. Shaq knew there was one person who needed to hear this. Agent Colton. He stepped into the kitchen, dialing the number. The phone rang twice before Colton picked up. Shaq? He sounded exhausted. What's going on? We found something, Shaq said. Annabelle remembers a place, a basement where they kept other kids. I think I have the location. Colton was silent for a beat. Then, send it to me. Now. Shaq did. A few seconds passed. Then Colton cursed under his breath. Shaq, you just dropped a bomb. Shaq's grip tightened. Talk to me. Colton exhaled. This location? It's owned by a shell corporation, but guess who sits on the board? Shaq waited. Colton's voice was sharp. A state senator. Shaq's stomach plummeted. This wasn't just criminals working in the shadows. This was political. This was organized. This was protected. Colton's voice was tense. Listen to me, Shaq. You need to get that kid somewhere safe. Now, if this goes as deep as I think it does, the people behind this aren't just going to let her walk away. Shaq's jaw clenched. Then we don't let them get the chance. Colton hesitated. Then, what are you thinking? Shaq exhaled. I have a platform, Travis. A big one. Colton inhaled sharply. Shaq. If the system is compromised, we go around it. We make sure the world sees this. These kids don't have voices, but I do. Silence. Then, you're serious? Dead serious. Colton exhaled. All right, I'll start pulling records. But Shaq, once you go public with this, there's no going back. Shaq's gaze flickered to Annabelle, who was watching him carefully. Good, because he wasn't going back. Not until every single child was found. The air inside the FBI command center was tense, charged with the kind of energy that only came before a storm. Shaq sat in a corner, his massive frame hunched slightly as he listened to the agents around him plan the raid. Annabelle was asleep in a small chair beside him, curled up under his jacket, her stuffed bear still tucked beneath her chin. Agent Colton paced near the center of the room, headset on, eyes locked on a map displayed across multiple monitors. Red dots marked every known child disappearance tied to this case. But it was the one Annabelle had pointed out, the isolated location deep in the woods, that had set everything in motion. We move at dawn, Colton announced, voice clipped. The site is heavily secluded, but we don't take chances. We're expecting armed guards, possible resistance. This isn't just a hideout, it's a hub. Shaq clenched his jaw. A hub. That meant this wasn't just about Annabelle. It was bigger, darker, systematic. One of the tech analysts spoke up. We've identified the SUV's owner. It's registered under a shell company linked to a known political donor. Senator Donovan, Colton finished grimly. We've confirmed his involvement. Shaq exhaled sharply. A senator. A man who stood on stages, shaking hands, pretending to serve the public, while operating this. A sick feeling settled in his gut. Colton turned to him. Shaq, you sure you want to be there when we go in? Shaq met his gaze. I didn't come this far to sit on the sidelines. Colton studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, but stay back. We'll handle the entry. Shaq glanced at Annabelle. She was safe now. But somewhere out there, other kids weren't. Not for long. The sun barely touched the horizon when the convoy of black SUVs cut through the misty backroads. Shaq sat in the lead vehicle beside Colton, bulletproof vest strapped over his broad chest. His fists rested on his knees, tension rolling off of him in waves. The safe house loomed in the distance, an abandoned factory surrounded by dense forest. Faded brick walls, boarded-up windows. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten ruin. But inside, it held nightmares. The FBI team moved swiftly, breaking off into coordinated units. Shaq stayed back as Colton and his men crept toward the entrance. Silence stretched thick through the trees. Then, a battering ram slammed against the door. Shouts erupted. Flashbangs exploded inside, sending shockwaves through the structure. Armed agents poured in. For a long, terrible moment, Shaq heard nothing but chaos. Then, "We've got children!" Shaq's breath hitched. He moved toward the building, despite Colton's earlier warning. As he stepped inside, his stomach dropped. The air smelled of mildew and something else, something worse. Metal bunk beds lined the walls, blankets crumpled, tiny shoes left abandoned on the floor. Some beds were still warm, some were empty, some weren't. A few feet away, huddled in the corner, were 5 children. Terrified, silent, eyes hollow. Shaq's chest tightened as agents carefully approached them, whispering reassurances, wrapping them in blankets. A little boy, no older than 6, trembled violently as an agent lifted him. Another girl, slightly older, had bruises around her wrists. Shaq had never felt rage like this. Colton approached, his face pale. "We're still searching the lower level," he said quietly. "But we got them, Shaq. We got them." Shaq exhaled. It wasn't enough. Not yet. A commotion erupted outside. Shaq turned in time to see them dragging a man out of a black SUV. And his blood boiled. It was him. The driver from before. The one who had stalked Annabelle on the highway. The one who had been watching from the shadows. They shoved him against the hood of a police car. His hands were zip-tied, but his face? He wasn't scared. He was smirking. Shaq took a step forward, towering over him. The man tilted his head. "You think this is over?" His voice was smooth, almost amused. "You don't know how deep this goes, big man." Shaq's fingers curled into fists. The man laughed. "You really think one raid stops this?" Colton stepped between them. "Get him out of here." The agents forced the man into the back of a police car, but Shaq never looked away. It wasn't over. Not yet. By nightfall, the news had exploded. Breaking: FBI raid rescues missing children, Senator Donovan under investigation. Shaquille O'Neal involved in child trafficking bust. Every major network was covering it. Social media was on fire. People demanded justice. Shaq barely looked at the headlines. Instead, he sat beside Annabelle in a quiet FBI office, waiting. Waiting for them. Then, the door opened. And Annabelle's mother walked in. She was shaking, her eyes red and puffy. Her husband followed close behind, his face strained with exhaustion. But the moment they saw Annabelle, her mother collapsed. "Annabelle?" Her voice broke. Annabelle froze. Her mother stumbled forward, falling to her knees. "Baby?" Annabelle's breath hitched. Then, like a dam bursting, she ran, straight into her mother's arms. Shaq swallowed hard as he watched the woman sob into her daughter's hair, rocking her back and forth, whispering things only a mother could say. Her father knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both of them, his own tears falling silently. Annabelle clung to them, breaking down completely. "I thought you forgot me," she sobbed. Her mother let out a sharp cry. "Never, never, baby. We never stopped looking." Shaq turned away, blinking hard. It was over. For Annabelle, at least. Colton stepped beside him. "You did good, man." Shaq exhaled. "It's not over, Travis." Colton sighed. "I know." Shaq turned to him. "These people, the ones behind this, they're not just criminals. They're in power. They have money. Connections." Colton nodded grimly. "And now? They know your name. Shaq wasn't scared. Let them come, because he had one more mission: to make sure every single one of them burned. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh rain as Shaq stepped out of his SUV and into the courthouse parking lot. The weight of exhaustion sat deep in his bones, but today wasn't about him. Today was about them. Annabelle, the children who had been rescued, the ones still missing, and the people who thought they could erase them. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit, inhaling deeply before heading inside. The courtroom was already packed: reporters, families, law enforcement. Every seat was filled, and the energy in the air was tense. Shaq had faced pressure before. He had played in championship games, stood in front of millions. But nothing compared to this. Because this time, it wasn't just a game. It was justice. Shaq took his seat at the witness stand. Cameras flashed, the room buzzing with anticipation. Across from him, the defense attorney, a man representing powerful people who thought they were untouchable, stood ready. "Mr. O'Neal," the lawyer began, his tone polite but sharp. "You're a basketball player, a businessman, a celebrity. Would you say you're an expert in law enforcement?" Shaq leaned forward, his deep voice calm but firm. But I know right from wrong, and I know what I saw." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The lawyer adjusted his tie. "You claim that you found a little girl on the side of the highway?" "Not claim," Shaq interrupted. "I did. And if I hadn't, she wouldn't be here today." The lawyer frowned. "And you believe law enforcement was complicit in covering up her disappearance?" Shaq's jaw tightened. "I don't believe it. I know it." A hushed silence filled the room. Shaq continued, his voice steady. "Annabelle Carter was reported missing. Then her case was closed. And when I called for help, the same people who were supposed to protect her tried to take her back. You tell me how that happens." The lawyer hesitated. Shaq leaned in slightly. "And it's not just her. Dozens of kids, erased, buried in paperwork like they never existed." His voice grew heavier. "These aren't just crimes. These are lives." The lawyer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Mr. O'Neal, do you think you're a hero?" Shaq was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. But I was in the right place at the right time. And I did what any decent person should have done." The judge raised a hand. "That's enough." The defense lawyer sat down, clearly rattled. Shaq exhaled. His part was done. But the fight wasn't over. Hours later, the verdict was read. Guilty. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashed, and the world finally heard the truth. Senator Donovan, corrupt officers, powerful businessmen, all exposed. It wasn't the end of human trafficking, but it was a start. Shaq stepped outside into the cold air, rubbing his hands together. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it just felt like relief. A few days later, Shaq stood outside a quiet suburban home, watching from a distance. Through the window, he saw Annabelle. She was laughing, actually laughing. She chased her older brother Eli around the living room, her parents watching with tearful smiles. She was home. Finally. Shaq exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. Then, the front door opened. Annabelle stood there, holding something behind her back. She hesitated for only a moment before running down the steps toward him. Shaq crouched down to her level. "You good, kid?" She nodded, eyes bright. "I wanted to give you something." She held out a piece of paper, a drawing. Shaq took it, unfolding it carefully. It was a picture of him, big, towering, drawn in crayon. But above his head, a halo. At the bottom, in small, wobbly handwriting, were the words, "My guardian angel." Shaq swallowed hard. He had faced some of the toughest players in history. He had broken records, won championships. But nothing had ever hit him like this. "You like it?" Annabelle asked shyly. Shaq cleared his throat, blinking back the sting in his eyes. "It's perfect." Annabelle grinned. Then without warning, she threw her arms around his neck. Shaq froze for a second, then hugged her back, carefully, gently. "Thank you." she whispered. Shaq's voice was rough when he answered. Any time, kiddo. She pulled away, smiling up at him. Then she ran back to her family, disappearing inside. Shaq looked down at the drawing one last time. Then he got in his car and drove away. As he reached the highway, he glanced at the long stretch of road ahead. The same road where he had found her. The same road that had changed everything. Fate had put him there for a reason. And he would never forget it. Millions of children vanish every year. But how many are truly found? How many are erased before the world even notices? This isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call. Stay aware. Ask the hard questions. Because the difference between being a bystander and a hero is stopping when no one else does.